Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you for another enriching session of ICS Book Discussion Series. My name is Sugandha Tandon and I am a research assistant at the Institute of Chinese Studies, and I have the honor of serving as Master of Ceremony for today's session. I extend a heartfelt welcome to each and every one of you who has joined us as we embark on the captivating exploration of global geopolitics through the lens of the edited volume, Locating BRICS in the Global Order, Perspectives from the Global South. The lead speaker for today is Dr. Rajan Kumar, who is the Associate Professor in the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Kumar's academic interests encompass a diverse spectrum, including India's foreign policy, international relations, the intricacies of the global south, the dynamics of major global powers, societal dynamics in Russia and Central Asia, and the proficiency in employing both qualitative and quantitative research methodologies. He has published articles in several reputed journals and contributes regularly to the Financial Express, the Indian Express, BBC, and Dainik Bhaskar. He will provide an overview and highlight the core ideas of the book while also dwelling on India's role in the BRICS. This is followed by Dr. Meenakshi Sundaryal, who is an assistant professor at the Center of Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Latin American Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her broad interest areas are cultural studies, the global south and its cultural expression, theater, Spanish global age art and literature, poetry, interface of history and art, translation studies, and gender. She is also the founder of the theater group named Mercier Lago, which came out with several productions at JNU. Dr. Sundaryal shall explicate on the possibilities of locating BRICS culturally. Up next, we have Professor Meeta Keswani Mehra, who is a professor of economics at Center of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her research interests are the interface of environment and climate economics, growth theory, open economy macroeconomics, development macroeconomics, international trade, energy economics, politics of regulation, and political business cycles. Professor Mehra will speak on the dominant socio-economic trends of the BRIC countries over the last 2-3 decades. And finally, we have Professor G. Venkatraman, a professor in the area of humanities and social sciences at the Indian Institute of Management, Indore, and currently a Fulbright Fellow in George Mason University, Virginia, USA. He is an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies and has been a visiting fellow at the BRICS Center, Fudan University, Shanghai. His areas of research focuses on China's engagement with global governance and business ethics. Professor Raman contributes regularly to popular media outlets like Founding Fuel, Financial Express, and The Quint. Professor Raman will talk about China and BRICS. Before I hand over the session to the lead speaker, I would like to lay some few housekeeping rules. I kindly request all the participants to remain muted throughout the presentation. Questions can either be posted in the chat box during the session, or you can utilize the raise hand option feature on Zoom. After the presentation, when invited, please lower your hand, unmute yourself, and ask your questions concisely. Please mention your full name and affiliation while asking the question. And with that, I now hand over the floor to the lead speaker. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Sugandha. And I would like to thank Professor Alka Acharya, the Honorary Director of Institute of Chinese Studies, for giving us this opportunity. We are absolutely delighted to be here. This is probably the second time I'm speaking for this institute. Earlier, also a few months earlier, I spoke on Russia, China, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, etc. So this is a great opportunity for me to introduce the book that we finished last year. And this was our COVID production, because the entire book was actually written during the COVID. But it started much earlier. It started during 2016-17, when we did a project with Institute of ICSSR. We were 4 or 5 members in that project. Most of us are here. Venkat, Professor Venkat Raman, Professor Meeta Mehra, Meenakshi Sundaryal, myself. Professor Ajay Patnaik was also a member of that group, and he has contributed a chapter also in the book. So the interesting part of that project was that it funded us to travel to some of the important countries of BRICS. As a team, we traveled together to Brazil. We also traveled to South Africa in the various universities, like University of Campinas. Bruno is here. We visited that place. We also visited Sao Paulo University, and then we went to Pretoria University and in Johannesburg, etc. And I've been visiting Russia regularly, so I also gathered some data from there. And Venkat is a China expert, so I don't have to say about him. Everybody knows him here. And so this is how it started, and we did a project. We submitted our project around 2020. We were ready with this project. So after submitting, the idea was what to do next. So the COVID started, not much was possible. So we decided to convert the report into a book. And then we invited some of the other scholars also for the book. And one of the best things about our travel was that we met some of the scholars from the native countries, like Bruno from Brazil, Oksana Khartunova. She was expected to join for this session, so I'm not sure if she's here, but from Russia, she has also contributed a chapter. Then there is a scholar from China who has written a chapter in the book. So we, and for South Africa, we could not, earlier we had a scholar who was writing from South Africa, so he withdrew at the last moment. So we invited Professor Malakar and Kushal Lagdian. Kushal is here. So they contributed a chapter on this South Africa. So this is how it started, and we are very delighted to discuss the book here. I'll take just 10 minutes to finish it so that other scholars can have time to present their views about their chapters. What are the things that one can expect from the book? In my view, the first thing that we found very interesting is that what is BRICS? There's a lot of confusion about BRICS. I've seen books and articles written on this BRICS. Some of the books are talking about the health issues, education issues. But what we found interesting that there's no proper book on BRICS from IR perspective, international relations perspective. So we decided to take this up, and as a challenge, we decided to look to write this book or to edit the book from taking IR route, taking the IR perspective. So one can expect to understand what BRICS is all about from the organizational perspective. How does BRICS contribute to global governance? This was the idea that Venkat kind of pushed it very hard, that we have to talk about the global governance and the role of BRICS in the global governance. So we are talking about the political governance. We are also talking about economic and environmental issues of global governance. So there are chapters devoted to these issues in the book. One of the most interesting section of this book is about the interest of the member states. As we know that BRICS is a very heterogeneous kind of organization. It has a number of states with different motivations. China, Russia, they have different interests. India, Brazil, South Africa, they have different interests. So what we decided that we should have a section devoted to different member states' interest in the BRICS. So and for that we mobilized native scholars. So we have a scholar from China, Liu Zhongyi, who wrote a chapter on China and BRICS. Venkat also contributed a chapter on China and BRICS. Similarly, we have a scholar from Russia, Oksana Khartunova. She teaches in a very famous university there, MGIMO, in Moscow, and she contributed a chapter and she wrote from the Russian perspective. And then we have this scholar from, as I said, Bruno Di Conti, along with 2 other scholars from Brazil. He has written a chapter from Brazil's perspective, why Brazil is interested in BRICS and what are the interests of Brazil in BRICS. And then we have Kushal Lagdian, who is here. So he has contributed the chapter on South Africa. So that part is very interesting about the book, where one can find the interest, convergences and divergences of interest from various countries, the reason they have joined BRICS and the way they want to pursue in the BRICS. So that is very interesting part. That's the second part of the book and very interesting. Also, there is always a criticism about BRICS that BRICS does not espouse any principle or norms. As you know, that multilateralism is always defined by certain principles and norms. So that was one thing which, and there's a lot of criticism about BRICS that it does not espouse any common shared principles. So we try to figure out some of the principles and norms which these states, the member state, they share. So one can find a discussion on that. And finally, the expanding domain of BRICS. BRICS started as an economic forum, but today it discusses political issues, it discusses security, terrorism issue, it also discusses energy, environment, etc. So we have new vistas of cooperation discussed in the book. So this book has 20 chapters, very extensive books, more than 200 pages. The first part is about locating BRICS in the global order. So we have taken into account the existing economic and political order and how BRICS as a coherent grouping, how does it locate itself in the global order. So there are chapters on evolution of BRICS contributed by Professor Ajay Patnaik. Then there is a chapter by Liberal International Order and BRICS, which is Bappaditya Mukherjee. He taught in the US and he contributed the chapter. There's an interesting chapter on history of money, metal, and mercantilism by Rohan, who teaches in Delhi University. And then 3 chapters contributed by our panelist here, Professor Meeta Mehra, on economy. So, and she'll talk about it. So I'm not going into detail here. And then there is also a chapter in the culture, because people ask that whether these countries share a common culture. So Meenakshi, coming from culture background, and Meenakshi is also an expert on Portuguese and Spanish. So she contributed this chapter on cultural synergy of BRICS. So that's the first part of the book. Second part, I've already said that all the native scholars from respective countries, member states, they have contributed chapters. And after the end, if Bruno and Oksana, Ashok, if they want to say something, so please, you may speak a few words about your chapter. The third part is about new vistas of cooperation. So as I said, that the domain of BRICS is expanding. Now BRICS is having a common platform for this health research, apart from the other institutions like NDA and CRA, New Development Bank, and Contingency Reserve Arrangement. So those are some of the issues, and then challenges of BRICS that has been contributed by Huma Qureshi, who is a journalist, and Aparajita, who teaches in MIT. And there's also a chapter on disaster management, because these are the new areas of cooperation which are emerging in BRICS, and disaster management has been contributed by Himanshu Shekhar, who is a reporter and journalist at a senior level in NDTV. So that's the structure of the book. Coming to the main point, what are the key ideas that we try to throw it up here, or we try to discuss in the book? So as we know that the world is witnessing unprecedented challenges in terms of geopolitical rivalry, the economic tension, rising protectionism, and also popular authoritarianism in many countries. When we were writing the book, the Brazil was ruled by Jair Bolsonaro, who was a very populist and authoritarian, and that was the case in India and many other countries. So liberal institutional order, where the US used to be the dominant player, so that has come under strain. And not only liberal international order, but also institutions which used to be the hallmark of these liberal institutional order. So that has come under strain, and we know about IMF not functioning properly. World Bank has certain issues. World Trade Organization now is divided house. Rules are very difficult to frame there. Similarly, United Nations is facing that kind of. So what we try to argue in this book, that these are the institutions which flourished during the peak of liberal international order. But as that liberal international order has come under strain because of the two things: decline of United States, but also because of the rise of alternative powers, China, India, Brazil, these countries from the global south. So because of that, those institutions have become partly dysfunctional. So we try to create the story out of that. And BRICS is essentially a story of rising regional powers which are dissatisfied with the existing order. They do not want to change the international order. That is not the impression that we are trying to give in the book. So they are trying to co-opt with the existing order, but also they are dissatisfied. So when you are dissatisfied, so what are the options? One is voicing the concern. That's one option. Second option is exit the order. The third is to create parallel institutions. So what we are trying to argue that this voicing the concern was not making sense. Exiting from the existing liberal institution was not an option. So all these countries, they decided to come together and they created a parallel institution. So we also talk about contested multilateralisms, that how multilateralism, which has been seen till now as the product of the liberal international order, how these states through BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation and other institutions also, they are trying to contest the dominance of multilateralism, which basically is, most of the ideal types of multilateralism are coming from the Western model and the Western liberal institutions. So those are the things that we discussed in the book. One important aspect of the book is that we have tried to counter the dominant narrative which has come from the West about the global South and about the BRICS. The West is normally dismissive about the BRICS. Western scholars, if you read The Economist, Washington Post, and also the articles from the journal, American Political Science Review, etc., so they are very dismissive about BRICS. They do not consider BRICS to be a very important organization. At least till now, they were not taking it seriously. And they overstressed or overemphasized on the heterogeneity of the BRICS, divergence of interest within, existing rivalry between India, China, etc., asymmetry of economy, where China is the dominant power and other economies are not as important as China, and absence of norms and principles. So these are the things you will always find that the Western scholars, they tend to emphasize on the heterogeneity and the rivalry, internal strife, tension, etc. But in my view, that is not the way to understand an organization or the function of organization. In today's context, you will not find a single organization which is not heterogeneous. Even European Union, for that matter, 2/3 members of the European Union have joined BRI, while the rest have not joined. Same is the case of, we have seen the kind of rivalry that in the G20, in the United Nations. So most of the institutions today are very heterogeneous, and there are issues in all the organizations. So BRICS also has some of the issues, but that does not mean that BRICS can be taken as just as you say, another brick in the wall kind of the notion. So both BRICS and Global South, those concepts are detested, not liked by the Western scholars somehow, and they consider that as outdated stereotypes, as a binary which may not provide some analytical framework. So if you see the last 10 issues of The Economist, the famous magazine, so the headings I found out are very interesting. So none of them is positive about BRICS. So the headings are like, BRICS is riven with tension. Expansion does not mean BRICS will become stronger. BRICS expansion would mean more influence of China. The future of BRICS is bleak. So these are the kinds of heading that are coming from the famous the Western scholarship, and unfortunately some of the Indian scholars, they also picked up the line. And one famous the security specialist Brahmachalani, he once said that BRICS is an acronym without substance. And similarly, one of the scholars who contributes regularly to Indian Express, he wrote recently in Foreign Policy, and where he said that the BRICS is too divided and it cannot be a threat to the West, and it is too heterogeneous to come to any policy. So what I'm trying to say, when Indian scholars or even Global South scholars, they pick up some of the ideas from the West and they try to argue on those lines. In this book, we have tried to counter those arguments. The book counters some of these assumptions, and for that we have taken the historical route. We have traced the origin of BRICS from RIC, Russia, India, China, the way it started in the 1990s. So normally Jim O'Neill, BRICS is associated with Jim O'Neill, but we try to trace the origin from 1998, when Primakov, the Russian Prime Minister, comes to India, and he threw the idea of Russia, India, and China cooperation. So what we are trying to argue that the politics of BRICS started much earlier than the actual formation or the actual nomenclature of BRICS that was given by Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs. We also argue that BRICS should not necessarily be associated with the rising economies. They are important. The BRICS is important because of that factor. But if you see the origin of BRICS, it originated during the financial crisis, when the West was facing the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. That was exactly the time when BRICS was formulated. So it owes its origin to the crisis rather than just the rise of these countries. And BRICS is defined, and so definitely we have argued in the book that BRICS has kind of defied the doomsday prediction of some of the Western scholars and also some of the Indian scholars. And we have shown in the book why BRICS matter for political reasons, for economic reasons, and also for normative reasons. So we have not, because most of the scholars in the book are from the global south. So we have also tried to argue that global south cannot be taken as a concept, as a geographical concept. It's a political concept. It's a kind of a deterritorial conceptualization of transnational politics, and it counters some of the ideas which are imposed by the West in the name of globalization. So some of the arguments that you'll see in various chapters are spread out through the book. So we have argued that concept of globalization and how the politics and the ideas and the norms and the values of the global south, they are different from the Western countries. So that that will reflect in almost all the chapters of the BRICS. And the next part is about the contested multilateralism, because this is BRICS, we have taken it as a multilateral organization. And in IR, if you come from international politics, IR background, so multilateralism is normally defined as a coordination of policies, foreign policy among three countries. But a better definition was given. This definition was given by Cohen, but it was modified later by this John Ruggie, who says that the coordination is important, but coordination based on certain principles that define the multilateralism. And he gives some of the concepts like a generalized principle of conduct, indivisibility, and diffused reciprocity, etc. So we have tried to show that how BRICS also tries to give some kind of, there are some norms which are antithetical to the West, but BRICS is also espousing certain norms related to sovereignty, related to the politics of the global south, and on the issue of climate change, regime creation, etc. So we have tried to argue on those lines. The important concept is the concept of contested multilateralism. This Morse and Cohen, they have written an article of this contested multilateralism. We have taken that argument forward, and we have argued in terms of parallel institutionalization, that how BRICS, by voicing its concern, by creating parallel institution, it is not only trying to contest the existing notion of multilateralism, which normally has been defined from the Western perspective, but also we have tried to argue that how these institutions, the global southern institutions, are unique in their way. BRICS is an institution which cannot be compared to any other institution in the world in terms of its its politics, in terms of its norms and values, because it is a global organization, so it cannot be treated as a regional organization of European Union or ASEAN. It discusses the issues which are very vast in terms of its domain, and BRICS cannot be compared to even G7. G7 is much more homogeneous compared to BRICS. BRICS is you have countries in BRICS which are asymmetrical in terms of economy. You have countries in BRICS which are diverse in terms of political system, and they do not necessarily share the culture the way European Union, for that matter, shared a certain kind of culture. But still, BRICS is a very vibrant organization. It's a unique organization, and BRICS has tried to despite some of the prediction, doomsday prediction of the West, it has continued to gain credibility in the last few years. It has become much more credible. So what we are trying to argue here, that BRICS multilateralism should not be seen from the ideal types of multilateralism of the Western countries. We are still some distance away from a cross-cultural understanding of multilateralism. So we have contributed to the IR literature through arguing in terms of multilateralism and the ideas and norms of multilateralism, which can be understood through the BRICS. And finally, that BRICS, the credibility of BRICS has certainly increased multifold in the last few years. And there are certain reasons to argue on those lines. First is, of course, its economic rise. If I compare the BRICS economy to the G7 economy, so in 2010, GDP of G7 was the GDP of BRICS was only 18%, which went up to 26% in 2021. And although China contributes even today 70% of the BRICS economy, but other economies are also become important, and India's rise, India's growth is also an important factor in that entire growth story. FDI inflow, if I tell you, it was only $84 billion in BRICS in 2010, which went up to 355 billion. So, several hundred times increase in terms of FDI coming to BRICS countries. And not only coming to FDI inflow, but also if you see the foreign direct investment going to other countries, So BRICS is now contributing to $250 billion. So BRICS countries are investing in the Western countries and also in the BRICS countries, and huge amount of money is outflowing from BRICS to other countries. So that has become important. Intra-BRICS investment has also risen from just 27 billion in 2010 to 166 billion in 2020. So one of the arguments which was always given that intra-BRICS trade and intra-BRICS investment is not very high. So BRICS has in the last few years, even that argument can be easily countered. The reason why credibility has increased, economic growth is one story, but also in my view, because BRICS countries, they stood together in a number of crises. For the Russian crisis, all the BRICS countries, they refused to condemn Russia either in the United Nations or in the other forums, and that created a very, you may like it or not, but that attracted a lot of countries in the global south. Because global southern countries, they were also looking to diversify their foreign policy, and they were looking for opportunities to join an organization. And that's exactly the reason what you see, the decision on expansion has taken place, 6 members included, and there are 40 applicants for the BRICS membership. And even France wanted to attend the Johannesburg summit of the BRICS, although it was not allowed. So that kind of tells you about the credibility of BRICS, the way it has become important in the last few years. And a third reason why BRICS has gained its credibility is because of the institution that it has created, and not to mention the New Development Bank or contingency reserve arrangement, or now they're cooperating on health issues. And even New Development Bank has invested roughly $34 billion in different countries of the global south, and is going to increase in the next year. So these institutions have become credible. They have become funders for developmental projects. And another thing that has created a lot of noise in the Western literature is the idea of BRICS currency and the idea of de-dollarization and the trade in local currency. So in my view, the trade, and Professor Meeta Mehra will discuss about these, so I'm not going into detail, but de-dollarization is definitely picking up. Russia and China, 90% of the trade now agreement that they have signed in the last 1 or 2 years, they are in the local currency of renminbi and ruble. India now, most of the imports that has taken place, energy imports, are roughly about $40 billion from China to India. So that is now being done through Vostro account that India has created in the local currency. And when I visited Russia last month, so one of the issues that Russian scholars raised was that Russia does not import too much of product from India. So Russia now has too much of money, and it does not know how to bring the money back from India to Russia. So, but definitely they have decided to trade in local currency, and that's an important development, moving away a bit from dollarization, although they still tag the currency to dollar, but again, they're shifting to local currency. Brazil has also decided to move to trade in local currency, at least among the BRICS countries. So that is one thing that has led to credibility. And of course, the inclusion of 6 members in the BRICS, that has given some credibility. And BRICS will become much more assertive in the coming years. So BRICS expansion now, the new countries that have been included, many of the countries, as you know, that Iran and this Saudi Arabia, they are oil exporting countries. So if you see the BRICS, most of the important oil exporting countries are now in BRICS. So and China and India are the major exporter of energy. So now energy cooperation would increase between these two among the BRICS countries. So that's one area of cooperation that I'm likely to say. So what I'm trying to argue that in this book we try to throw some new ideas related to the narrative, which is critical of the Western narrative, vis-a-vis the growth story, the importance of BRICS, the kind of multilateralism. So and the issue of expansion, and we rightly predicted. I read the book again, and we rightly predicted that BRICS is likely to expand. So these are the things that we have discussed in the book, and I'm sure that the scholars and the students they will benefit from the book. I'm extremely grateful to all the colleagues here who have joined for this session, all the scholars who contributed to this volume, and also Akash Chakravarti. I could see Akash having joined here. So Akash from Routledge, he was very supportive. So thank you so much, Akash. And I'll stop it here so that our colleagues, our co-panelists can take it forward from here. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, so can I start, Rajan? Is that fine? Or am I supposed to wait for someone?
Sugandha, can I ask?
Yes.
You can start. So Meenakshi is next, and she'll talk about the cultural synergies within BRICS, cultural cooperation, etc. within BRICS.
Yeah, so let me begin with thanking the ICS for giving us this really nice opportunity here to meet, and also to meet our old colleagues, Bruno and the rest, who I haven't really met in person, who are the co-writers of this book, who have contributed. And yes, so let me begin with the idea that Rajan just expounded, that, the BRICS, the obituaries to BRICS have been written time and again since its inception. So both, the curious thing is that both from its, diehard critics on the left and the right of the spectrum. So yet we see that over the years it has survived, and not only survived, but it is really thriving in a sense, if we can say that. So it gave me an idea while I was writing my chapter in the book, which deals with culture, that indeed we need to look at this phenomena as something that needs to be located in the cultural sphere if we are to really understand it in a more comprehensive sense. So during the efforts that we were making to collect data and to collect information firsthand, visiting the BRICS countries and so on and so forth, I could see that there is a little disconnect between how people perceive culture in the official fora, and how we in the cultural field, actually the people who are in academically related with the sphere of culture actually perceive it. So there was a disconnect in that, and I through this study wanted to make that point really amply clear. So the idea of culture has been perceived by most people as something fossilized, as something which is not really dynamic, and it relates to our identity, and therefore it is just there. Whereas in the field of cultural studies, it has been long known, and we've been dealing with this idea as something given. But this journey of editing this book has given me this opportunity to understand that there is a need not only to have an esoteric sort of a discourse on culture, but there is a need to connect with how it is perceived around the world also, especially in the field of IR and all, whose part BRICS stands now. And it is very clear that BRICS has certain very, very distinct kind of contribution to make in the field of culture. So I am back to this idea that we need to first of all create, this lay it very clear that the idea of culture is not something that we might perceive. For example, a cultural program, or a particular dance form from India, and having a cultural program around that, which was like how most people thought it was when I talk to people generally in the IR circles. So we understand that the BRICS and the kind of culture that it is formulating and it is affecting in the world arena is something that is making some kind of epistemological changes of how we perceive this outer area of international relations, this outer cap. But below this outer cap of international relations, where we only perceive of countries, their heads, their governments, etc., lies a vast, mass of this pulsating mass of people who are, daily living this category called what we conceive of as culture. And this category is not fossilized. This category is not static. It is something very, very dynamic and related with the lived lives and related with how people are, how people are relating to each other, how people are relating to their work, how people are getting their work, how people are expressing love, how people are expressing relationship between communities, how people are expressing themselves in forms of diversities, etc., etc. So therefore, I have tried to at least see culture as something, as a category, which is very, very dynamic, which in the sense of BRICS tries to, create this new sense of a challenge to the world order, which is in the context of the most of the BRICS countries lies, and we have tried to locate it in the decolonial discourse. So, but also during the course of studying further, I found that the decolonial discourse itself is not, the be all and end all of how we can, see this intersection of culture with BRICS. We have to also look at its political economy. So a combination of both of these things, the decolonial discourse on the one hand, and on the other hand, the political economy of the movement. Both of these will produce and is producing a particular kind of culture that we see in the BRICS countries, and what BRICS is producing further as an idea. So at the outset, I tried to see and locate BRICS culturally through the prism of decoloniality as propounded by Quijano, Aníbal Quijano, and the rest of the theorists from Latin America, and the political economy of those times. So because decolonial discourse is by itself not enough to sustain us through the challenges that the current politics of the world is giving us. So we find that the hitherto colonized countries are, challenged with this huge problem of uneven development, so to say, challenges of a neoliberal world order on the one hand, and the policies, pursued by their respective governments in the other, which are again perpetuating to a great extent, which might or might not perpetuate these policies within their domestic, fields. So therefore, I have tried to locate the idea of BRICS culturally in both these in both these points. And the third is that I found that the metaphors of spatiality, the spatial metaphors that we often use in terms of, coloniality, etc., the East, West, the North-South paradigm can be very, very useful in terms of how we can locate this culturally. And from there, we see that spatiality itself and the ideas in the 20th century, when from time we moved, in the theoretical discussion, spatiality found its, presence in late 20th century literature and was formulated by people like Soja, Foucault, and so on and so forth, who have talked about this third space and heterotopia and such things, which have tried to, conceive of space as something which can be heterogeneous and which can be imagined in a way that would give, credence to a possibility and which would challenge the kind of a world order which is there, the dominant discourse on culture. So I have tried to look at the BRICS and the cultural products that it creates around itself, the spaces within which it moves, that is the various cities, the BRICS network university, and the other spaces that the BRICS provides, like the bank itself, the new development bank, etc. How we can see them as these, cityscapes that itself, by themselves, tell us the story of the global South. So by the very idea that these kind of spaces will now have visibility, and they are not shy to kind of, assert themselves while not really challenging so articulately the world order, but by their very presence and by their very, continuance and their expansion. Now we can see that there is a certain sense that the global South is really a voice, and it has really come into its own now. So, these are the areas that we need to focus on culturally, I think, and we can expand more. It will be very, very, I'm very curious to know, in fact, that how it will pan out with the expansion of BRICS, how it is going to pan out with all these 6 countries, which are completely different cultural spaces, how they will, lend themselves to this, cultural expression of the countries that the BRICS comprises.
Meenakshi, I've been asked, I hate to say this, but I've been asked, time is,
So I'll just conclude by saying that, that there are just 2 ways to see this, that we see culturally the entire idea of BRICS as, contributing in the discourse of the cultural discourse that is there, which is a contestation, rather, contestation to the dominant order. The second is to kind of see the kind of cultural and how we can see and cooperate culturally in these spaces that we call the BRICS spaces, which are the BRICS countries and all, because they are the shared spaces of the global South. They are the shared spaces which are still struggling to decolonize themselves, the mentality and the persecution that goes around in that terms, and also have to bear the burden of the neoliberal policies and the capitalist economy that, levies on them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meenakshi. Now, may I invite Meeta Keswani Mehra, Professor Meeta Keswani Mehra, to speak on her chapters. She has contributed 3 chapters in the book, and economic part. She is an economist in JNU, CITD Department, School of International Studies. So, Professor Meeta Mehra, 10 minutes for you. I'm so sorry, but this is the time that we have here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rajan. And at the very outset, I would like to, extend a very warm thank you to ICS, in particular to Professor Alka Acharya, for having provided us this platform to be able to, have such a vibrant discussion around our book, and Snigdha and Sugandha for, working out all of the arrangements and the logistics. So Rajan and Meenakshi have already laid the foundation for what I need to talk about. And of course, coming from where I do, I will have an economist lens. And these 3 chapters that have been contributed to the book are not my sole, works. These are co-authored with Mohammad Azharuddin, who's also in our midst. He's just completed his PhD and has moved on to NIPFP as an economist. So here I go. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for inviting me to the book discussion. And my talk will essentially focus on BRICS economies, their place in the global economic scenario, and typically trade and investment linkages, because, I've sort of tried to give it an open economy kind of perspective. Additionally, during my talk, I'll touch upon the role of new institutional mechanisms that have been put in place by the BRICS group, and likely implications for governance and monetary systems that are being perceived by the members of the group. especially in the wake of its expanded membership. So the very first chapter, so this work sort of got completed in 2020. So some of the material that I talk about actually draws upon that, but a lot of the inferences or key takeaways don't really change. Qualitatively, only some numbers get updated. So as Rajan rightly pointed out, BRICS group actually gained attention some 2 decades ago. Essentially in the post-financial crisis kind of phase, because of the significant economic growth being experienced by the individual economies amid slow growth or even recession in the rest of the world. And in fact, much of this story persists even in the post-COVID era. So individual BRICS economies and as a group, the GDP growth rates have actually surpassed the average for the rest of the world. BRICS has, in fact, become a ubiquitous economic entity. It's been, identified by researchers, investors, policymakers alike as emerging market economies from the South. And in fact, in a recent sort of, discourse, IMF sort of projects that BRICS could very well contribute close to half of the world GDP by 2030 in comparison with the prevailing 22%. And in fact, some of these trends would be more pronounced once we talk about the expanded BRICS Plus group, given their heft from the global South and increasing sort of work towards this multipolarity causes. BRICS are economically influential in very diverse ways. China is among the world's biggest industrial and manufacturing hubs and is a significant R&D, center, hotspot. India is ahead of many other BRICS nations and many other countries in some high-tech sectors, information technology, oil refining, pharmaceuticals. Brazil and South Africa in their own right are very, abundant in natural and ecological resources, while Russia, as we all know, is a large hydrocarbons exporter. So India's economic growth is expected to hover around 6%. China has sort of experienced some slowdown, but what's being commonly believed is that it does have the wherewithal to make a policy turnaround. It may not be easy in the short run, but medium to long run, it can certainly see a turnaround. So that's broadly talking about the economic heft of these countries. In terms of the demographic profiles, the very first chapter on the economy actually discusses the demographic profiles. And, with the exception of China, which is sort of facing, slightly aging population, the demographic profiles of the BRICS could very well support the realization of economic prospects of the group. Brazil, India, and South Africa currently have large populations that could sort of migrate to the working age population by 2030 or 2040. Of course, therefore, what it would require is need for educating, reskilling, especially in light of, demand for very different kind of labor force in light of a very digitized world that we face now. Therefore, human capital clearly lies at the core of robust recovery for BRICS in the post-COVID period. As for trade linkages, intra-BRICS commodity trade patterns really hold a lot of promise. So what we found, by crunching a lot of data, both Azhar and I found that, if we were to look at revealed comparative advantage or trade intensity indices for a range of commodity categories, there's high trade complementarity and intensity within the groups, within the BRICS group. And in fact, differences in, the composition of economic output or endowments is responsible for bestowing, comparative advantage to these countries in very different commodity groups. So trade mix essentially consists of agricultural products, minerals, fuels, manufactured goods that range from low tech to high tech. Goods trade, in fact, over the last 2 to 3 years has risen despite geopolitical tensions and sanctions on Russia. Because, although there were sanctions on Russia, some other BRICS countries have sort of occupied, the space left by, sanctions by Europe in terms of trade. And these trends clearly augur well, in terms of groups expansion that, in terms of a trade kind of, not a block, but in terms of a group, that's trading with each other, it could, go from strength to strength. The impressive performance of BRICS is also visible in attracting FDI and portfolio investment that Rajan touched upon. In fact, inflows of FDI were observed to be steady or even increasing for most of the BRICS countries in spite of COVID-19 pandemic. And this kind of fragmentation of production and global value chains could very well incentivize intra-BRICS FDI. The current currency reserves amount to US 4 trillion. For the group as a whole, it has the contingency reserves arrangements to be able to pull countries out of any liquidity or currency crises. And most countries have manageable government debt situations. In a Western-dominated world, BRICS also took upon itself the task of setting up the new development bank to finance infrastructure and sustainable development in emerging and developing economies. NDB provides BRICS a new influential and prominent position in the global monetary system. It has provided very timely support to its members and other emerging economies to cope with challenges posed by COVID-19. And clearly going forward, this sets the tone for enhanced cooperation amongst BRICS countries and others on public health, very critical issues of public health, climate change mitigation, clean energy, and urban resilience. In fact, several contentious issues surround climate mitigation, burden sharing, adaptation, climate finance, which are constantly being discussed in the G20, IMF, World Bank, and UN bodies. And NDP and BRICS Plus could certainly contribute to, helping out with some of these contentious issues. So one of the chapters, another chapter of the book where, Azhar and I again crunched a lot of data is panel import gravity model, where we tried to look at what exactly determines, trade inflows for BRICS as a group. So we were really looking at bilateral trade flows between BRICS and 10 most important trading partners. What we find is that the per capita GDPs of these countries, the very formation of the BRIC as an event, the population levels, the trade freedom indices, all of these positively contribute to trade. And in fact, interestingly, global financial crisis, when we look at long enough span of data, it did not adversely impact trade flows within the BRICS group. Going forward, therefore, the key sort of policy takeaway is that liberalized trade could very well spur economic growth in short to medium term as countries of the group attempt to recover from the prevailing recessionary situation or debt situations. And in the long run, this could very well feed into preferential or regional trading agreements, especially as the group expands. BRICS as a whole has also been attracting a lot of FDI, rightly pointed out by Rajan. And what we found by crunching data on foreign direct investment inflows is that FDI or foreign direct investment and portfolio investment tends to be both market seeking. So it's looking for, consumption demand in these countries, and also resourcing seeking, because these countries tend to be very abundant in natural resources. So in their attempt to attract FDI, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19, member countries should focus on both fiscal and monetary policies that would encourage steady inflows of foreign capital, especially in the high-tech sectors, without losing sight of job creation, because these are very populous countries we are talking about.
Mita,
yeah.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Just conclude.
Yeah, 30 seconds. There have been some discussions on de-dollarization, and so I'll try and sort of touch upon that. There's been, fair amount of emphasis on transactions in local and digital currencies. This is still to assume importance as there's lack of consensus on it. Given large bilateral trade imbalances that Rajan clearly pointed out, also political tensions, so those could mar some of these endeavors. A full-fledged BRIC currency is somewhat, to my, according to my opinion, is a far-fetched goal, given its implications for sovereignty of individual countries, need to harmonize economic and financial systems, the prevailing India-China standoff, and economic sanctions on Russia, all of which pose currency risks. In terms of BRICS Plus, the expansion, last 10 seconds, BRICS countries view the expanded BRICS Plus as an added opportunity for economic growth and globalization. They could tap into each other's markets and attract more FDI. Saudi Arabia and UAE have already committed to around $100 billion of investments in India. So this is the upside of the argument. On the downside, however, consensus building could become a challenge, given that you have countries which are very heterogeneous in terms of their economic structures and governance structures. So, coming up with, solutions for common interests could be more difficult, and sharing of costs and benefits therefore becomes more challenging, to say the least. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Over to you, Rajan. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Mehra, for that wonderful presentation. And now, may I invite Professor G. Venkatraman, who has shifted from this global south to global north. He is in Virginia, United States at the moment. For a few months, he has gone there. So let's see if his perspective remains the same or he has changed his perspective by going there. Venkat, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So thank you, Rajan. Thanks a lot to ICS and Professor Alka Acharya, ICS Director, for giving us the platform to talk about our book. And fortunately, we are getting to talk about the book when the world is suddenly taking notice owing to expansion of BRICS. China, of course, is the elephant in the room. But given the nature of the book, we could devote only 2 chapters. And one chapter is from, well-known expert who keeps on writing, Liu Zhongyi. And there's another chapter that has been contributed by me. So due to lack of time, what I would do is just, cull out some important, arguments from both these chapters and, present it before you. So Liu Zhongyi basically, argues that, China is convinced that a platform like BRICS can increase what he terms it as social power, and what is that social power? The social power is basically to increase its acceptance to implement what he calls, quote unquote, networking strategy. That is, pursue a parallel network of states rather than by competing for, so rather than competing along with other emerging powers for what they term is that their historical rights to claim a certain kind of a space in the international system. And that kind of a space has been severely restricted owing to a certain kind of US-led, post-Second World War order. And this kind of an approach also, has a certain kind of continuity as far as China's foreign policy is concerned, in line, and it goes in sync with what China has always, termed as the United Front strategy. So therefore, he argues that BRICS is a very, very important pillar of China's international strategy because, one, it helps China foster ties with other developing countries. And in fact, the BRICS expansion has, further added to this kind of a expectation as far as BRICS is concerned on the part of China. Second, China also, would like to use BRICS as a bridge between China and other emerging economies. And third, China wants to use BRICS as a platform where it can pursue its multilateral strategy for promoting global governance and what has now been called, facilitating a strategy of voice and exit. On one hand, voice the concerns by being a part of the existing system. On the other hand, threatening to exit and establish parallel structures of global governance. He also talks about, BRICS as an important instrument in China's foreign policy to basically to fulfill what he calls it's a 3-wheel drive structure. So the first wheel is basically to facilitate economic, trade, and financial ties. Number 2, political and security ties. And third is people-to-people exchange and cultural ties. As part of the first wheel, for example, economic, trade, and finance, he cites how China, after initial hesitation, very much embraced the idea initiated by India of establishing the new development bank or the BRICS Bank. As part of the second wheel, he cites the 2017 Xiamen summit, where China led BRICS to foster a consensus on understanding global governance structures. So these are the main arguments as far as Liu Zhongyi's chapter is concerned. Now, coming to my chapter, I try to argue that BRICS is yet another platform to transform global governance that is more suited to Beijing's national interests, and this pursuing of national interests is not to be done head on, but rather along with a coalition of emerging powers. So therefore, there is a, twofold purpose. Number one, BRICS, tends to legitimize the demand to reform the international system as it exists today. It helps, China to ally with other emerging powers like India, Brazil, and Russia to paint the current system as one which is characterized as unjust and unequal. And it doesn't reflect the current international system, reflect their emerging status. And number two, obviously, it also helps China deal with international hostility, whereby the rest of the world tries to perceive China as a revisionist power. So that will be, it's a kind of a shock absorbing mechanism for, China. So I have tried to mainly, look at China's approach to BRICS from two perspectives. One is look at the motivations, which drive China to invest on BRICS. And second is BRICS as a very integral part of China's multilateralism. So I'll just highlight, 2-3 points in each respect. So number two, as far as the motivation is concerned, China in the last 15 to 20 years, Chinese scholars, Chinese foreign policy makers have been talking about global governance. So what they call is Chuan Chiu Chirli. So therefore, as part of this, they talk about what is called the new security concept. And this new security concept counters the US-led West with a certain kind of multilateral approach. So it basically tries to mobilize, support of all the skeptics as far as the emerging countries are concerned, emerging powers are concerned, to take the rule-based liberal international economic order head on, which for a large extent, especially in the 1990s after the Cold War era, has been propagating a one-size-fits-all Washington consensus approach. And so therefore, it tries to, and further, China basically, tries to argue that the Bretton Woods institutions are actually instruments of advancing geostrategic and geoeconomic, goals of US. So through BRICS, China wants to facilitate certain kind of dialogues which will offer an alternative vision of international order. So the bottom line is that China, wants to become a leading actor and wants to mobilize support to basically advocate the cause whereby it can inspire other emerging countries that this one-size-fits-all Washington consensus doesn't suit us. There are alternate, ways of solving problems and finding out solutions. And those solutions lie in the traditional, cultural, and historical, legacies that some of these countries have inherited from their past. So they should try to look within rather than try to, adopt, this Washington consensus kind of a model, which, has taken a major beating, owing to the 2008 financial crisis. Coming to China's multilateralism, China views the current order as quote unquote, what is called each hao tuo qiang, that is one superpower and many great powers. That's how it characterizes the current world. So in the post-2008 US financial crisis era, China wanted to develop this a counter narrative to Washington consensus, and BRICS is yet another strategic tool, along with organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and other organizations that it seeks to do, and Belt and Road Initiative, etc. So China also seeks to use the BRICS platform as a platform whereby it can pronounce its various policy statements, and it always, wants to convey this impression that it is not merely a pressure group. In fact, it is more than a pressure group that negotiates favors, for emerging powers. So therefore, BRICS is not yet another organization, but it's a logical sharing experiences and exchanging lessons. It's a project which helps China as a developing country, face common challenges and discuss these, challenges with like-minded, partners and other developing countries. Further, China also wants to use BRICS as a platform to discuss some of the non-traditional, security issues. And last but not the least, the argument is, in the wake of successful hosting of Beijing Olympics, Shanghai Expo Forum, there has been within China a certain kind of a clamor that China should, play a greater role in the international system. So this has kind of influenced policymakers to latch on to this whole sentiment of Chinese nationalism. And this active, approach of China as far as BRICS, along with other fronts, it's also investing significantly on BRICS because the argument is that this growing sentiment of Chinese nationalism also has a spillover effect in its foreign policy, and BRICS is one of the manifestations of that investment as far as China's foreign policy is concerned. So therefore, it fits in very much within Xi Jinping's policy to pursue the national rejuvenation, and the CCD, common, destination for mankind. And BRICS also very nicely helps China, use selectively a dogmatic and pragmatic stance. So therefore, it provides, BRICS is a platform whereby China, time to time very adroitly plays what it calls, protection or of its core interests, and sometimes basically it also uses this BRICS as a platform to protect and promote its national interests. So it's very interesting. One way, it uses this core interest as more in deontological sense, and then national interest in teleological sense. And in fact, it's very interesting that, in 2009, China distinguished between what it calls its core interests and national interests. So the idea, to be short, is to, China is very, very much invested in BRICS because it wants to develop new coalitions with other states. And, it wants to provide alternative to the, Washington Consensus, rule-based liberal, international economic order, and wants to perhaps, contend with, the US-led West, not only at the level of economic growth, but also at the ideational level, whereby the idea is to chart out new ways of development, which more or less is not, again, one-size-fits-all approach, but, something which promotes new form of state market hybrid development strategy. So I'll stop here. And then, I'll leave the floor open for question and answer.
Yes. Thank you so much, Venkat. You are dot on time, so I don't have to say anything else. But lovely presentation, Venkat. Thank you so much. Venkat is our China expert, China scholar. And he is the one who kept pushing us to kind of finish the book on time. All of us are terrified of Venkat. So thank you, Venkat. Thank you for all your support and cooperation earlier and finishing it on time here. So thank you. With Sugandha and Alka ma'am's permission, because Bruno had joined from Brazil and Ashok from Australia, Oksana Khartinova from Russia. So may I request Bruno to just speak a few words about either BRICS or your country's policy on BRICS, or your chapter,
sure.
And then Ashok.
Great. Thank you very much, Rajan. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. Congratulations to you and to the other organizer. It's a great pleasure as well to see old friends we haven't met for a while. So it's good to see you all, and congratulations for the book, and thanks a lot for the invitation for the book and for this event. Very quickly, because I know we will have some other people to talk about their chapters. Well, one of the good things about this book is that in the sections which are devoted for the national cases, so for the 45 countries, the organizers, they gave us a kind of a structure which was followed in our chapters. So it's very good in my opinion, because then the chapters are not, they have a dialogue between them. And then in my chapter, now in all chapters, we do a kind of a background talking about the history of our countries and then the history related to the relations to the global south. And then we talk about the discourses related to BRICS, the interests, the economic cooperation. I won't have time to go into all the details, but I guess in this moment, what is important to talk about Brazil is that we had in the last years, or in the last 10 years, if you want, a very important instabilities in our country, both economically and politically. When the BRICS were created, Brazil was, like the other countries, in a boom, in an economic boom, in spite of the subprime crisis. And then, as Mita has said, well, things have changed. So in many countries of the BRICS, we had economic crisis, and Brazil is one of the countries which suffered a very huge crisis, economic crisis, a deceleration from 2013 onwards, and then a big crisis in 2015, 16. And then with the political problems, we had a coup d'etat in 2016 against President Dilma Rousseff, and the worst scenario became reality with the election of Bolsonaro. So it was a total nightmare for the Brazilians in all aspects, but also in what regards the participation in the BRICS. I will read here just to let you know about what I'm talking about. A very short sentence of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs during Bolsonaro's government in his inauguration ceremony speech. And he said, "We will return to ourselves. And in this return to ourselves, Brazilian people want to recover their roots, want to live again as part of the West, as part of the great adventure that begins there with the Greek and Romans." So you see that he was establishing the roots of Brazil as a continuation of the Greek and Roman civilization, which is well, it's really nonsense, and it's a clear attack to the former foreign policy of the Workers' Party governments, Dilma and Lula, which was addressed to more dialogue with the Global South. So with Bolsonaro, with Temer, and then with Bolsonaro, it was a total reversion in this policy. And then the orientation was to the US, Western Europe, and so on. In spite of that, BRICS showed some resilience. And then even Bolsonaro government had to keep the commitments, the institutional commitments with the BRICS, but obviously Brazil was not a protagonist anymore in this group. And then the good news, which is not in the chapter, as you know, is that we have Lula again. And then in these first months of this new office, it's already very clear that BRICS became again a priority. There are several signs. One of them, it's very symbolic, but always also very effective, is putting or choosing Dilma Rousseff, our former president, to be the president of the New Development Bank. And then she's trying hard, for instance, to go deep in the de-dollarization, in the diversification of the loans in terms of the national currencies. So just to let you know that we suffered a lot in this sense as well in regard to the position, the role of Brazil within BRICS or within the Global South. But now we are having better winds, and I can finish here to leave the floor to my friends. Thanks. Thank you very much. And I apologize because I'll have to leave at in 15 minutes. So I already apologize for that. I have another commitment at 11 a.m. my time, Brazilian time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno. May I request Ashok, just 2-3 minutes, Ashok, how does Australia, because Ashok, Professor Ashok Sharma is teaching, he's a visiting faculty in Australian National University, and he also contributed a chapter in the book. So Ashok, would you like to say a few words? Somebody please unmute Ashok. Organizers, Sugandha, may I request you to unmute Ashok?
He's already unmuted. He is
Now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rajan. It's finally, and all the editors for bringing this book. It's great, and inviting me to contribute a chapter in this. And I have, my chapter title is the COVID-19 pandemic and the BRICS response, cooperation, constraints, and geopolitics. I won't go into details of the chapter, but This was an opportunity because I think I'm the only person who's written on COVID-19 in this chapter. And I'm not an expert on BRICS. My area is Indo-Pacific, US, China, India, geopolitics, Quad, and all that. But I was writing a book on geopolitics of COVID-19. So I got this idea. So I will focus on that aspects of this. And just 2-3 points. One is that it was an opportunity for BRICS, the organization like BRICS or the European Union to come together and play an important role in the containment of COVID-19, but they failed. BRICS failed in that they did start in the beginning with the foreign ministers meeting and high officials meeting in the beginning, but it was confined to the bilateral cooperation among the BRICS. And the reason was the India-China geopolitical rivalry, and we saw the Galwan Valley clash and during the COVID-19 outbreak. And instead of BRICS, it was the Quad which emerged during that period in COVID-19, and they started playing an important role in the COVID containment. Quad was not designed, not meant to contain, to look into these non-traditional security issues, because it was emerging as the containment of China, how China was trying to dislodge the US primacy during the COVID outbreak, when it sensed an opportunity to play a kind of an assertive role and by helping countries with the PP and all that. So both India and China had the opportunity to play an important role. India did play with generic medicine and China did, but they could not come together. The geopolitics rivalry, and so there is definitely, there's a brighter future for BRICS. We have seen how it has expanded and how G20 summit has happened and Global South cooperation, and all the speakers have very well presented. And you have given Rajan and the economist, I forget her names. She also pointed some good points, and Raman Venkat has given the Washington consensus how China is trying. So I think this is going to be a very important issue, how India plays into this. India-US relations is very significant. Will India be, will India go that far? Because China will try to use it for its own geopolitical intent. It is entirely, entirely clear in its ambition that it wants to dominate the world. It wants to dislodge the US primacy, and India-US relations, a comprehensive global strategic partnership is totally is based on the containment of China, especially in the Indo-Pacific. So this is a question where how India is going to figure in this when India is becoming closer to the West, and the US-India relationship has already gone to the next generation partnership. And it's very sensitive areas they are including. So will that geopolitical rivalry, and India is also very close to the Quad, and it's a central, it's a center of the idea of the Indo-Pacific, where India is being, is considered as both strategically and economically, when the world is looking to fix the global supply chain, which is, by default, the US and let China dominate. So this is an important issue, and I would say, and this has been raised on many platforms. So this is my take on this, that though there will be all these sustainable development, emerging economies, de-dollarization, all this will happen. But once it starts challenging the US dominance, what is geopolitical intent, where China is trying to use it, then it will be a spoil. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok. Oksana Khatinova from Moscow. Oksana, are you there? Can you hear me? Can you unmute Oksana? Oksana Khatinova organizes.
Yes.
Yeah, Oksana, yes.
Okay.
Yes, hello Rajan, hello everybody. It's
Hello.
a pleasure for me to participate here.
Okay, thank you. So Oksana, would you like to say something? Okay, so yeah,
yes, I now found, I managed. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Because I was trying to switch on the sound, but it was written that organizer doesn't allow me to do it.
Okay. Okay, Oksana.
I just want to greet you all, I think. And I'm happy that I managed to contribute to the science project, COVID project, as you said in the beginning. And certainly, maybe some information is a little bit dated, but the book really worth reading and I think citing. And it's a good that with such a big international team of scholars participated in these efforts. Thank you very much, Rajan, for bringing us all on board.
Thank you. Now the floor is open. In case I can request the organizers. Sugandha, how do you want to take it forward? Do you want the participants to ask questions?
So there are some questions in the chat box. If you want, I can read the questions and then maybe we can move.
We can't hear you, Sugandha. Can you be a little clear? Yeah.
Am I audible now?
Even the voice is not very clear. I can hear you, but not very clearly.
There are some questions in the chat box. So with your permission, I can read them out and then maybe we can move to raise hand options if there are any.
All right. Okay. So participants, feel free to ask questions. Give very brief comments. We don't have much of time. So please feel free to ask questions either in the chat box or you can just unmute and speak up. Welcome.
First question is by Anil Jai Singh. His question is, where will India find itself in BRICS a few years from now? Will we have a toe the line of India, Russia, Iran axis, or will India find itself becoming a collateral as China uses its platform to revive its unrelenting ambition to displace US as a global superpower?
Well, India, Anil Jai Singh, who would like to ask? Well, India may think it is the leader of the global South. China certainly does not think so. With its overwhelming domination of the economic actor of BRICS claims, very much going to be calling the shots with enabling BRICS can be the vehicle to reestablish its economic largesse. This is more than, this is not a question, this is more like a comment. So thank you very much, Anil Ji. And what I see broadly, very briefly, what I see happening in the next few years, that the contest between India, China, and also Brazil included, there is a contest for leadership in the global South. And there are several claimants, and China is definitely the dominant one, but it is being contested very fiercely by other countries of the global South. And India is definitely one of them, but also Brazil and South Africa. And so if you see this formation, this BRICS, this is a formation of the regional leaders. So all the countries, at least till now, they are the regional leaders. India is undisputed leader in South Africa. So is Brazil in India in South Asia, Brazil in Latin America, China has a global outreach, Russia in Eurasia. So this is an organization of the regional leaders. And now what we see that these countries are trying to do two things as far as global South is concerned. One is to cut down the influence of the West, but also they are trying to enhance their own global influence. So that's how I see unfolding in the next few years. So there is both an element of cooperation and competition as far as the space of global South is concerned. That's what I think. If Venkat and Meeta, if they want to add something, please feel free to add. Okay.
No, that's fine. I think.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's fine, Rajan. I think you've answered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the economy side, it would be essentially, a mix of some kind of, policy framework or purely market-driven kind of things. Because even though there were geopolitical tensions, India and China have continued to sort of trade with each other, and I would think that a lot. We can't completely ignore the fact that it is relative competitiveness or competitive advantage that would determine, international flow of goods and services and investments. Yeah.
The second question is again from Anil Jai Singh, and Venkat, you may listen to this question here. Anil Jai Singh ji asking, would we rather have a Western-led order which at least has some respect for democratic rule-based order, or would we rather have a unipolar world driven by the Chinese characteristic and see thought? My quick thing before Venkat begins is that if we go to the Western-led order, so that will also mean a lot of Western hegemony, starting with colonialism to hegemony. So I'll definitely not agree to that proposal. But yes, Venkat, I think this is your question because it's also South China Sea.
Yeah, so so the question is again quite generic, but my quick response is, everything boils down to this whole thing of hegemony. And so there are, as US has portrayed itself as a benevolent hegemon. But again, there is a major gap between rhetoric and reality. The American, benevolence as far as hegemony is concerned has been rather selective. So if you are saying that, if you're making a utilitarian choice that, this is less of a pain, that is American benevolent hegemon than the, than the new hegemon, which is about to rise, which is many of people perceive, then it's more of an individual opinion. But the point is that, by saying that are we going to be okay with this hegemon even before the hegemon has started exercising its influence? You have already accepted that the hegemon is there and it is more dreadful than the previous one. So I think, we should rather than being so pessimistic, I think, I feel that countries like India, and other countries are strong enough to negotiate and to ensure that BRICS stands as more of a coalition which bats for certain interests. And if other countries fail and give China that space, you can't blame China for becoming a hegemon. Now it's up to you that whether China becomes a hegemon or it does not become a hegemon. If you give the space to hegemon, why China? Anyone else would like to become a hegemon. So it's up to others to, engineer certain kind of coalition and bring together certain intersections which will prevent the, emerging of yet another hegemon, benevolent or malevolent. Hegemon is a hegemon. That's what is my response.
Thank you, Venkat. There is a question.
If I may just add a little bit over there, Rajan.
Yes, please.
But it's also, it reminds me of the issue of, media cultures and narratives. So the kind of opinion that this question raises, it seems to be that the US, Western world democracy, and the rest of the world is undemocratic. And, so it has a lot to deal with media cultures, what is coming to us. For the longest time, we, the students of Latin America, for example, have seen that the US has considered the entire Latin America as its backyard and has been, there are files which have come out, declassified, and information around that it was directly involved in a lot of coup d'etats around the, in Chile, in other areas. So we'll have to take that with a pinch of salt when, we try to, enforce this binary in this fashion that US rule-based order and the rest of the world is undemocratic. So I think we also have to see through the lens of culture again. So media cultures would come, and what we perceive in today's world as post-truth and things like that, when everything is available online at the same time, and it's a war out there. So we have to sift through all this, subterfuge many of the times.
Thank you, Meenakshi. There is a question from Sugandha about the change of Brazilian regime, change of regime in Brazil, and its impact on this BRICS group. And this was directed to Bruno, but Bruno has left the meeting because he had to attend some other meeting. So very briefly, he already answered in his comment that Lula was one of the founder of BRICS. He was in the first regime when he was earlier there. So he was one of the founding members of BRICS. And as you know, Lula comes from a left-leaning background. So he is very positive about the concept of global south. Recently, he threw up the idea of BRICS currency, although it was not picked up by other countries, especially India, because India thinks Chinese yuan will become the dominant currency. But a political regime actually is favorable for BRICS because Lula is very pro-global south, Lula is very pro-BRICS, and he would like to engage very actively with although he is not trying to kind of alienate Brazil with the West. I'm not saying that, but yes, he'll be far more active compared to what Bolsonaro was earlier. So that was the question. There is okay, Bruno has left. A question for Professor Mehra. Professor Meeta Mehra, there is a question for you from Sugandha, and she's asking, are there constraints or limitations related to the NBD new development banks' funding capacity, and how do these limitations impact its ability to address the developmental needs of BRICS nations? So NDB funding, basically limitations related to that.
Yeah. So basically, the contributions have come from all the member countries, and disbursements are typically decided based on so far it's been a fairly equitable distribution of funding for whether that's for clean tech, clean energy, or creating cleaner cities, or for coping with COVID-19. So essentially, it was a smaller group, and they were looking at common interests of the group members. And typically, the capital is sort of subscribed by members of the group equally, and that.
Meeta, can you hear me? Have we lost Meeta? Venkat? Meeta, we lost you for some time.
Yeah.
Meeta, unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Now you're audible, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last bit could not be heard, is it?
No, we couldn't hear you.
So it's members together who have, sort of provided funding for the basic fund, which is supposed to be close to $100 billion. And the subscription is equally divided. And the focus or the thrust areas are commonly discussed in these forums, which span like a whole range of subjects like public health, including, challenges posed by pandemics, like COVID-19, clean energy, renewables, urban resilience, and so on. And based on a case-by-case basis, project funding is provided to the member countries and also to some other developing countries. So basically, that's how, it's sort of always trying to cater to some common interests of the group. This is typically how it is. This is what I know about it, Sugandha.
Okay, I think there is a question, last question for Meenakshi Sundaryal. Meenakshi, you can answer, and then we can probably wind up because we have taken up global all the time. So Meenakshi, there is a question for you from Suhas, who is asking, ma'am, you talk about there is a difference between the perception of culture between the BRICS government and the larger academic circles in these countries. Then how do you think BRICS countries are trying to bridge the perception gap? What kind of efforts are being made by the BRICS countries? So that's for you, Meenakshi. Unmute yourself, Meenakshi.
Yeah. Am I audible? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So yes. So there is a general perception, and this perception that I talked about is not just among the academic circles or the, or the BRICS forum and things like that at the official level, but it is also a general perception among people. What I was talking about to differentiate that was the actual, realm of culture, which encompasses all these things. It talks, culture is a realm which encompasses our concerns, our lives, how we lead our lives, what are our, relationship with other people, as a collective and as an individual, so on and so forth. So, so instead of that, we, sometimes feel that there is a fossilized idea of culture, that it only resides in the folk dances, perhaps in some cinema, in some other things which are there, and do not see it as a dynamic construct. And but I think now, after in 2015, when the BRICS had its MOU of cultural understanding and all that, there were many of these things underlined there. And I think now it is on a good track, because the BRICS culture ministers meetings and all, they're already talking about cooperation in areas of, of films, in areas of digital, in the creative economy. The term is creative economy, that how the peoples of all these countries can come together. And, through that, we can find a way, a dialogue, because until and unless we utilize the cultural products, which are, for example, the films, media, and other things which are coming out, In these days, there is a variety of genres out there, variety of cultural products that are there. So in our understanding of a cultural product, it is one which, in which certain concerns about the people's lived lives are raised, and it establishes a dialogue with the consumers of these products. So with that, thing in mind, I think BRICS are on a better track now, which I see from their official discourses.
Thank you. Thank you, Meenakshi. And before I hand over to the organizers, my gratitude to other authors who have joined here. Surbhi Chaudhary, if you can come on camera, thank you very, very much. Kushal Lagdian and Shraddha. Shraddha, if you're there. And of course, Akash Chakravarti, is it possible to see you? Akash is the editor of Routledge, and he's the one who has kind of helped us bring out the book. Akash, can you hear us? In case you were not there, thank you very, very much. My deep gratitude to Akash, Routledge, and of course ICS for organizing this event. So thank you very, very much. My thanks to my panelists, my co-panelists here, Amita Mehra, Jeevan Kantraman, Meenakshi. Alka ma'am, if you can hear me, thank you very, very much for giving this opportunity. And all other friends who joined us, thank you very, very much. So Sugandha, now it's your turn.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. With that, we shall conclude the session. I extend my gratitude to Dr. Kumar, Dr. Sandreha, Professor Mehra, and Professor Raman for sparing moments from their hectic schedules to engage in this intriguing discussion. The video of today's discussion shall be available on ICS YouTube channel. On behalf of ICS, I invite you to join us for the forthcoming Wednesday seminar on Deciphering the Global Development Initiative, China's New Pathway for the Global South. Information regarding our weekly seminars can be found on ICS website, or you could subscribe to our newsletter.